Welcome to KRACHWERKE. This is a quick illustration of how to use the GP-200 software. So I only really use the in its kind of pedal setup, pedal board kind of recreation setup. So I'll go through that, the way I use it, and let's see how this goes. Okay, so obviously the first thing to do is to download the software and install it. For it to run, you do need to have your Valeton plugged in into the USB and switched on. And if you then run the software, you should be presented with this. So I'll give a quick overview of what we see here. So first things, let's go to the settings, which is the little wrench or whatever you want to call it. In here you've got some basic settings of how to set it up. Usually it comes pretty much standard. So you've got your input settings as being electric guitar, line-in or acoustic guitar. You can set your input level. The cab left and right mode on and off is quite interesting because it actually relates to you can so let's say you want to line it out into a front of a cab, into the all right, let's track back. You've got several output options on the Valeton. I've covered that in previous videos, so maybe have a look at them. But essentially, because it's a full amp and cab simulator, you can run it straight into a mixing desk, obviously, or straight into an interface or recorder with full cab and amp simulations. Obviously when we go through the setting up a patch, for example, I'll show you that. But essentially, let's say you want to put one line into the front of the house, into the mixing desk, and you want to put one into your amp. It means that you can switch one side off, the cab emulation, and one side on. So the cab emulation, let's say right, will go into the front of house or the mixing desk, and the left one with the cab off will go into the power amp of your guitar amp. So that's one way that you can then have something to monitor yourself on stage and play through an amp, but also have your full setup running through the mixing desk, which is pretty cool. Now, I've made some statements earlier that would be cool if you can switch off both the amp and the cab, and that you can also switch them off not just for the left and right, but also that you've got control over the volume, the amp and the cab output on every single output, which is the line outs left and right, as well as the XLR outs left and right. And that would make sense because it gives you a lot more options of how to deal with. You can literally run a stereo setup through your amps and a stereo setup through the mixing desk with cab emulations off one side and cab emulations on the other side. Anyway, then you've got a recording level. Obviously you set these to taste depending on your rig. So here's all sorts of options here. The auto cab match is like when you select an amp, that it automatically chooses the cab that goes with it according to Valeton. So if you choose a Mesa Boogie amp, it'll give you a Mesa Boogie cab. The display mode, foot switch, patch, or signal change. So like I said, I use it in foot switch mode, which is basically kind of mimics it as a pedal board, and that's the way we're going to set this up today. Then you can, I don't play a lot with this because I use it fairly simply, but you can, all the buttons on the Valeton you can actually assign to something. The expression pedal, you've got an extra expression pedal, and you can obviously use it for different things. Play around with that. Options are varied. You've got a global EQ, which is pretty cool. This is my settings here, just because most of the stuff is kind of high gainy, so I drop the low end, dial out some of the high end, and dip a little bit on the on the mid range, and a little bit on the 200 for palm mutes, that it doesn't kind of build up that oomph stuff. I don't use much MIDI, so I've not messed with the MIDI at all. Firmware update is pretty simple. You go to the website, you find the latest firmware, you put it on a folder in your computer, you go in here, you select it. Obviously you leave the thing on and you just follow the instructions. It's pretty clear and pretty easy. And then obviously all the other things, just some release notes and about. So like I said, this is in the pedal board mode, dare I say. And here you've got a complete control over the Valeton. I would suggest that if you really want to do a lot of patch settings, then using the software is a good idea. I managed to do pretty much everything just on the Valeton, but it is definitely kind of more obvious and easy to do it on the software because you've got a better overview. It just feels a little bit more user-friendly. Dialing in stuff on the Valeton itself is not difficult. You kind of get used to it, but it is not super kind of easy either. It's not super intuitive, whereas the software makes things fairly intuitive. There's a couple of wee things to look out for, but I wouldn't worry about it. So obviously, first thing, we'll just go through this. So you can load IRs, which I have a video about how to load them. You can also load patches, which I have a video out for. I'll link all of them below, so if you want to see them, I'm not going to go through them again. But essentially, you can load and you can back up your patches that you've made or any patches that you want to keep. Because sometimes when you do firmware updates, you might lose them. So if you want to keep any patches, you can export them to your hard drive. You can upload any third-party patches. I make quite a few. Please have a look. There's a few, and I actually sell them. That is just to support the channel. I mean, they're like £1 each or something. You've got global settings for a patch. You've got your BPM. Now, the BPM, setting the BPM for your patch is actually quite useful because it allows you to set some of your time effects to the BPM so that they are not out, so you don't have to try and fiddle and kind of find the sweet spot for your delays. It means that you can go into your modulations, delays and reverbs, and you can actually set them to your BPM so you know they're correct. So if you know your song is roughly 120, set the BPM. It also means that if you want to have a backing track like the drums here up here, and it plays back at that BPM that you require. You've kind of got a global out. Then you've got your patch list with all the things that relate to it. So for example, saving it, renaming it, importing it, exporting it, and moving them up or down. That is quite useful, especially if you're starting to make quite a few patches and you want to set up a set of patches that are in line with each other so that you can jump patches for different songs, but you don't have to like jump like 10 a time. You just want to have them together. Let's say you play like some rock and one of them just kind of uses clean and a certain amount of effects, and the next one maybe a crunch and different effects. You can't build them into all the same patch, so you build two patches close to each other, and for one song you go to one patch, next song you go to the next patch. And then obviously with the renaming function you can then name it, maybe even the song name or whatever you feel like. Then here you have all your effects in like these rows, and my first complaint about the effects was that you can't double up. So sometimes you want two distortion pedals, you want to gain stage some distortion or something like that. You can't really do that, but you can move them about. And they have, I think, kind of listened to people because they wanted more options in the pedals. So you have more pedals now in the distortion and the preamp in the kind of boost section. And the reason they probably did that is so that certain pedals that you kind of tend to stack are now in both. So although you can't double up the distortion section of pedals to use maybe two different pedals from that list, but there are now certain ones that are kind of duplicated in one another so that you can so that you can stack certain pedals, which are usually stacked. So let's say a tube screamer into a distortion pedal. That is now kind of possible. Then you have your amps, your noise reduction pedals, your EQ pedals, your cabs, modulation, delay, reverb, and your volume. So I think the easiest way to do this is to actually set up a patch. And I kind of know what I want to do. I want to set up something fairly obvious. So let's go to a patch. So you can select any patch here. I can just go through them. I don't want to save it. I just want it to running. So I will save that one. So here's my patches. This is the one I use for pretty much all the time. For jamming. Okay, but we'll go to an empty one. So we'll just scroll down, go to an empty one. Here's all of my custom ones. So let's go to 31A. So let's rename this first. We'll call this demo patch. And what we want to do is we'll start with an amp. We'll go for a... So I basically just click on the amp and I'm gonna go for 800. Why not? All right, so now I've got an 800 and I'm gonna switch it on. So I'm not hearing anything yet because the volume pedal is... So the volume pedal usually defaults to a volume pedal essentially, and it means that if it's in up position, it's kind of off, and if you push it down, you have volume. So I usually switch that off because I usually don't use a volume pedal. So first things first, amp and a cab. So we'll use one of mine. We'll use the sabbatical. I like this cab. So I'm not setting any amp settings yet because we'll get to that later. In the cab settings, first things, the volume is usually a bit low, so I put the volume up, I put the high cut down to about a speaker kind of frequency, which is up to maybe 6,000-7,000 hertz, and I cut the low end a bit. So now we have just a basic 800 running. I'll go for my usual settings. There we go. And we have an amp running. Peaking. Right, so what do we usually do with the 800? We give it a wee boosty. So let's do the obvious. We'll put in a tube screamer. Do the usual with the tube screamer, pump up the volume, give it a bit of oomph. Can't beat that. So now we want to add some additional effects. We want to add a reverb. We'll go for a nice reverb. And once you click on the reverb again, you've got your and we'll switch the tail on. I'm gonna leave those settings, they're just fine. Okay, what do we want next? We want a delay. I'm gonna do a really, there's tons of delays here, and lots of them now are the ones with the S behind it are stereo, but the ping pong is stereo too. And just to give you a full effect of the stereo, I'm gonna put the ping pong on. Now this is where you already see where the sync comes in. So if I click on sync, now pretty much all the time delays and some of the mods have the sync button. And basically that syncs it to the BPM. I'm also going to switch the tail on. The tail basically means that if you switch it off, it goes through the motion of the last kind of delay until it stops. So now we have a delay. And it's synced to the BPM. What else should we do? I think that's fine. The rest of them are pretty much obvious. If you want some chorus, you just switch it on, choose your chorus, and set it in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up as a pedal board, the way you would imagine a pedal board to be. I know. Let's do a wah. I never do a wah, but we'll do a wah. Now the wah is not assigned to a foot switch yet. So the expression pedal yet, but we'll do that later. So we'll do that next. The next thing that's probably interesting to look out for are these two little arrows. You can move them, and essentially these arrows are where your effects loop is going to be. So if standard effects loop would be kind of here. So it's the in and the out. And you've got effects loop options in the patch settings, which we'll get into in a minute. So let's go back. Obviously you can have the effects loop, you can have a parallel and a serial. The parallel, I don't know, you're gonna have to play with this, because I've been messing with it, and I think that for my usage the serial is better. The parallel obviously kind of blends the two signals between, so if you've got any additional outboard pedals on your Valeton, then it kind of blends them, whereas in serial it's obviously in line. So it goes directly through those pedals and nothing else. Whereas in parallel, there's kind of like a dry and a wet signal going through the effects loop. So now we've got like a basic setup, but all the things are on. We don't really want that. So now we want to assign certain pedals to the foot switches. And we also want to assign the wah. So we're going to the patch settings. And then the first thing you see are these. Now, as you can see, you've got basically your pedal rows here. And now we know that we have a distortion pedal. So we'll put the distortion on control button 1. So that is your bottom left foot switch on your Valeton. So that's on 1. On 2, we'll put the delay. On 3, we'll put the reverb. Now you can actually set it to such a way that you can have more than one pedal on one button. So if I wanted to switch the delay and the reverb on at the same time, all I would do is switch them both on. But I don't want to do that. Then we'll put control button 4 for the wah. So now I can switch the wah on and off. Here's the effects loop setting, parallel or serial. Leave it in parallel if you've got nothing connected. If you put in serial, it'll go off because there's nothing in the loop, so it doesn't go through. So the expression pedal 1 will be the wah, and in this case I can now switch it on and off. So that's pretty much that. Now I'm gonna save this. Right? Now, you can't see this because I was stupid enough not to put a camera on it, but I've got my switches bottom row, left to right, so A, B, C, and D. So A is the distortion. If I switch it off, it goes off. Okay, I'm gonna switch the wah off. So the wah is off. That is the button D, bottom row. C is my reverb. B is my delay. And then A is distortion. So now you can pretty much use it like you would a pedal board. You've got your pedals in front of you with your buttons, and you press the button, you press those pedals on and off. So let's just check out the wah if this is working properly. Okay. Right, now the wah is working. So I can switch the wah on and off by the push of a button, off, and then I switch it on. And now you can see here the position is changing as I'm... Now with these expression pedal settings, you can get very creative. I actually have on one of my patches my mix blend for my delay on the main expression pedal. Then I've got an external expression pedal which controls either modulation or the mix of a of any of the other pedals, either reverb or some of the modulation. And what that means is that if you switch it to in the up position to be completely zero, and on the down position on, full on, it means that you don't have to assign buttons for it, because you just start pressing it down to start blending it in, which means that realistically, or not realistically, I do it that way, like you can have 2 extra buttons. You don't have to put your delay on a control button, because it's always on, and you use your expression pedal to engage it, or dare I say from zero, blending it in, which means that you can assign that button to something else. So what I'd like to ask is there are in the links below, there are links to some of my patches. If you purchase some of them, it would be a great help. It really supports the channel. I don't do a lot of things to try and support the channel, but I hope this gives a good overview of how quickly, using the software, you can get a patch going. And what is also nice about this is that you've got much easier control. So if I want to just put in the author quick, I'll do that. We'll make this about that. So you can move these around as you wish, and you can completely customize this to suit you and make it easy for you when you are recording or playing live, which I find extremely useful. Yeah, I don't really use the other settings, so I'm not really going to go into it. The display mode being in the patch setting or the signal chain mode. So sorry, I'm not going to do a video on that. Never messed with it. The last thing I wanted to show you is just to understand how I made this video, so you can understand my workflow and how we got to these sounds. So I routed from the XLRs out, so the balanced out on the Valeton, I routed them into my interface. I've got a 4 input interface, so I've got a mic in one, and then I've got 3 and 4 is left and right, and I pan them left and right. So when you hear the delay, hear the delay and you hear the stereo, it's because I'm actually recording 2 tracks left and right and panning them left and right so that you can hear the full spectrum. It then goes into Reaper basically directly, so the sounds that you're hearing now are with cab and everything on. So I can switch the cab off, for example, and you'll hear the difference. So yeah, I always use my own cab emulations. The cab emulations on Valeton are fine. I think they're actually pretty good, but they're not great. So I actually use the ones I made for my own recordings that I made for basically to use in Reaper with other amp sims, but they work absolutely perfectly here. In fact, I always use them. So that's it. Any questions, any recommendations, any comments to what I've done? If you think there's better ways of doing things, like, subscribe, do all that lovely stuff. And also on another note, we build pedals. There's a link below to our pedal shop. We've got 50% off if you use the Campus Lives discount code. Anyway, all information and links below. Thank you very much.